Do you know how hard it is to get a classic?
Like that dude, Old Dog, that's not him. Did he do Inkwell first? No, I actually did Old Dog.
And it's starting to bubble over, and they need to see the realities of it.
Menace II, Society is often remembered as raw, fearless, and iconic, a street tragedy that cut through the gloss of early 90s cinema.
Hell no, man. Keisha, she gonna be at the motherfucking party, nigga.
Yet beneath its violence and style lies a quieter story of intent and reflection, a truth its own cast has spent years unpacking. What if the film that defined urban realism was also a mirror the actors feared to look into for too long? What if behind the bullets and bravado was an almost spiritual study of choice and consequence? Let's pull back the curtain on the brotherhood, the breakdowns and the brutal honesty that shaped every scene. What the cast finally revealed after years of silence rewrites how we see this film forever. This is the hidden pulse of Menace II Society, the detail that changes everything you thought you knew. At its heart, the story we are telling is about authenticity and the cost of telling the truth.
I want you to go out and do something crazy.
Don't worry about shit. I'ma handle this nigga for you.
Through the lens of the Hughes brothers, through the raw nerve of Tyrone Turner, through the haunted stillness of Lorenz Tate, the film became a document of survival disguised as fiction. The big idea that will unfold here is that the cast was not just performing, they were reliving. They were revealing. They were paying a price few understood. Over the next 12 movements, you will see how intention clashed with instinct, how art imitated life until the line collapsed. You will see how every look, every silence, every scream carried a confession. And by the end, you will not just remember the movie, you will understand the men and women who lived it. The year was 1993 and American cinema was shifting. The glossy optimism of the 80s had shattered, and the streets of Los Angeles were burning with anger and aftermath. Out of this tension came two young twin filmmakers, Albert and Alan Hughes, barely in their 20s, armed with a script that refused to flinch. They called it Menace II Society, and it began as a small independent gamble financed by New Line Cinema at a time when studios were unsure how to handle black urban narratives. The Hughes brothers had one rule for their cast: no gloss, no hero worship, no Hollywood polish. Real neighborhoods, real fear, real energy. Every corner you see on screen was lived in by someone who had survived something. Tyrone Turner was chosen to play Kane, the young man trapped between fate and fury. Lorenz Tate stepped in as O-Dog, the volatile friend whose charm masked catastrophe. Jada Pinkett, long before her superstardom, embodied Ronnie, the calm moral gravity in a world dissolving into chaos. When the cameras rolled in South Central, this was not just another film set. It was a community staging its own therapy. Locals watched in silence as the cast reenacted scenes that too closely resembled reality. Some cried between takes, others nodded as if saying, yes, this is how it feels. But the deeper truth revealed years later was that even the actors were unsure where their characters ended and their real selves began. What started as storytelling became emotional archaeology, and the Hughes brothers were excavating something sacred and dangerous at once. And that uncertainty would soon erupt into a decision that changed everything. Before Tyrone Turner became Kane, the role was offered to another young actor who backed out after reading the script's darkest pages. The Hughes brothers believed that only someone who understood quiet pain could play the part without turning it into performance. Turner came from the same neighborhoods the story was born in, and that authenticity made his casting a revelation. Yet the defining decision was not who played Kane, but how the ending would unfold. Early drafts had him surviving shot and haunted, but alive. It was the studio that pushed for finality, wanting moral closure, wanting the cautionary tale to feel absolute. The Hughes brothers resisted, but then surrendered to a grim symmetry. In a world built on cycles, survival sometimes felt dishonest. Years later, Tyrone Turner admitted that filming Kane's final moments left him emotionally hollow.
Get him out of here. Go get some fucking help, nigga.
He felt as if he had buried a part of himself on that street corner. Lorenz Tate, meanwhile, confessed that watching those scenes later filled him with unease. He said it reminded him too much of people he actually lost. That decision, to kill Kane, gave the film its mythic weight. It was no longer just narrative, it was prophecy. It whispered that redemption might be possible but not promised, and that fatal honesty would define both the film's legacy and the cast's memories of making it. But the weight of realism comes with a cost, and soon that cost would surface behind the scenes. Shooting on location in Watts and Jordan Downs was never just about authenticity, it was about danger. Crews worked under curfews, police cruisers hovered nearby, and at times production had to pause because real gunfire echoed from blocks away. The Hughes brothers were fearless but not reckless. They recruited locals for security, they hired neighborhood residents as extras, and they shared meals with the community to build trust. But tension simmered daily. When lights went up after dark, the energy changed, and the cast felt it. Turner described one night scene where he could feel eyes watching from the shadows, and it was not part of the script. Budget pressure made everything worse. The film was shot in under 2 months on roughly $3 million, small even by indie standards. Jada Pinkett later said she felt every day could collapse into chaos, yet that unpredictability gave her performance a trembling sincerity. Even Lawrence Tate, the film's breakout star, admitted that the set atmosphere bled into his psyche. He stayed in character longer than he should have. He avoided smiling off camera because O-Dog would not have. He said the line between acting and embodiment vanished after week 3. The Hughes brothers pushed for rawness, but also became emotional caretakers. They knew that what they captured was more than cinema. It was a documentation of lived trauma and rebirth. But exhaustion crept in. You can see it in the eyes of every actor in the film's last act. A collective fatigue that was not staged. Yet from that exhaustion, something extraordinary emerged. A set of performances so authentic they blurred truth itself. And that is what most fans never figure out. Most people remember the film's explosive opening, the liquor store robbery, where O-Dog's cold composure becomes cinematic legend. What many overlook is the quiet rhythm beneath it, how the camera never fully aligns with his perspective. The Hughes brothers used subtle handheld sway to imply instability, hinting that even in confidence there was fracture. In one later scene, when Kane sits in Ronnie's living room, sunlight drips through half-closed blinds, painting bars across his face. It is not accidental. That framing echoes the cell he is spiritually trapped in long before bullets find him. Even the score hides clues. Composer Q.D. Aoun layered faint church organs under the hip-hop beats, creating a ghostly undertone that suggests judgment stalking every decision. It is sound theology disguised as street rhythm. And there's a haunting Easter egg in the final montage, a child running past a burned car as narration fades. That child was not in the script. He was a local boy who wandered into frame. The Hughes brothers kept the shot because they saw poetry in it, innocence moving through ruin. What fans rarely realize is that these micro-decisions were the film's secret language. Every glare, every flicker, every echo was a moral question. The actors did not perform morality tales, they lived them in miniature gestures. Watch it again, and you will see that even silence has dialogue. But for the cast, the hardest dialogue happened off-camera when creative control collided with cultural expectation. The biggest clash during production was not actor versus actor, but authenticity versus authority. New Line Cinema wanted a marketable urban thriller. The Hughes brothers wanted sociological truth. The cast was caught between those visions. Studio executives sent notes suggesting more humor, more hope, more commercial polish. The directors refused. They argued that to soften reality was to lie to the audience they came from. Lorenz Tate recalled a meeting where Albert Hughes told the suits that the real audience would smell dishonesty in the first 5 minutes. The conflict grew louder after test screenings when some viewers complained about excessive violence. The cast stood by the directors, publicly defending the film as unfiltered realism. Yet privately, they wondered if America would ever accept this kind of mirror. The tension peaked when the Motion Picture Association threatened an NC-17 rating for brutality. The brothers cut seconds, not meaning. They left every emotional scar intact. Tyrone Turner said it felt like trimming flesh from truth. By the time the film premiered at Cannes, it carried not just street energy, but moral defiance. Critics were stunned, calling it too real, too raw, too much. But the cast knew that was exactly the point. The fight for authenticity had cost them comfort, but preserved something sacred. And yet irony has a way of circling back. What started as rebellion would soon be romanticized by the very culture it warned against. The greatest irony of Menace Descendant society is how the film meant to condemn violence became a style guide for it. Within months of release, audiences quoted O-Dog's lines at parties, wore his fashion, and blasted the soundtrack in celebration, not reflection. The cast watched with disbelief as tragedy became trend. Lorenz Tate said in later interviews that he was proud of the craft, but disturbed by the misunderstanding. O-Dog was never meant to be a hero. He was the embodiment of recklessness, the warning that charm can mask catastrophe. Yet fans cheered his audacity, repeating his dialogue as if it were gospel. Tyrone Turner shared similar heartbreak. He described walking through neighborhoods after the premiere, hearing kids call him Kane with admiration, not sympathy. He said it was proof of how deep the pain ran, that even despair could look like victory to those with no other options. The Hughes brothers struggled with this too. Their film was a plea disguised as provocation. But once it left their hands, it belonged to interpretation. The cast often said that what haunted them most was seeing the movie's cautionary tone twisted into iconography. Still, the irony holds power. It revealed how pop culture metabolizes pain, how it turns warnings into anthems. The same movie that was supposed to end cycles of violence became part of the visual language of rebellion. And in that paradox lies its eternal relevance. But irony was only one layer. Beneath it all, there was still a breakthrough waiting to happen, one that would redefine black cinema forever. When Menace the Sex Society premiered in May 1993, it stunned critics and captivated a generation that felt unseen. The film earned over $30 million domestically, turning a tiny indie into a cultural flashpoint. But its real victory was artistic, not commercial. The performances were hailed as electrifyingly real. Roger Ebert called it a tragedy of style and substance. Film schools dissected its pacing, its handheld intimacy, its near-documentary rhythm. For the cast, this recognition validated their sacrifice. Jada Pinkett's quiet strength as Ronnie won praise for offering rare tenderness amid chaos. She revealed later that many of her lines were improvised, drawn from her own family experiences. That instinctive honesty gave the film its heart. Lorenz Tate's O-Dog became an archetype for the modern anti-hero, a performance that rivaled De Niro's Travis Bickle in intensity. He would go on to star in Dead Presidents and Love Jones, but he said none demanded as much spiritual energy as Menace. Tyrone Turner, however, became the soul audiences could not forget. His subdued pain anchored the film. Yet Hollywood offered him few roles afterward, typecasting him into stereotypes he refused to perpetuate. That quiet sidelining became symbolic of the industry's reluctance to embrace authentic black male vulnerability. For the Hughes brothers, the breakthrough meant creative freedom. They were suddenly the youngest directors ever to compete at Cannes. Their next projects, From Hell and The Book of Eli, would expand their visual vocabulary, but Menace remained their emotional center. What looked like overnight success was in fact the culmination of risk belief and endurance. The cast did not just make a hit. They made a map, a blueprint for telling the truth in an industry afraid of it. Yet with every breakthrough comes reflection and sometimes regret. The ripple effects of their choices would echo far beyond the film itself. Menace II. Society altered the cultural weather of the 90s. It arrived alongside Boys, Yarn, The Hood and Juice, but carried a sharper blade. Where others sought hope, Menace offered confrontation. The cast would later recognize how that tone influenced everything from music videos to fashion editorials. Directors like Antoine Fuqua and F. Gary Gray cited it as proof that street realism could be poetic. Even artists outside film felt its pulse. Hip-hop luminaries from Tupac to Nas referenced its scenes in lyrics and visuals. Ironically, Tupac had originally been cast as Sharif, the reformed Muslim friend, before being dismissed after creative disagreements. That lost casting remains one of cinema's great what-ifs. For audiences, it created a vocabulary of authenticity. Viewers began measuring realism by Menace standards. They demanded grit without apology, rhythm without choreography, emotion without sentimentality. But the cast paid a strange price for that influence. Turner became wary of roles that felt too familiar. Tate fought to show range-taking romantic dramas to break expectation. Pinkett sought purpose-driven scripts emphasizing healing over hurt. Meanwhile, the film's moral questions rippled into classrooms and debates about media responsibility. Could a movie this violent still be moral? Could art portray destruction without glamorizing it? Professors and pastors argued while the cast quietly lived the answers. Years later, when Criterion reissued the film, it was not nostalgia, but necessity. The country had changed, yet the story felt current again. Police brutality, incarceration, despair, all still lived in the headlines. The ripple had never stopped moving, but to understand why it endures, we have to return to the core truth the cast discovered. That this was never just about the streets. It was about being seen. Menace II. Society endures because it refuses to lie. It stares into the abyss and refuses to blink. The cast revealed that every choice they made on set was rooted in honesty, not entertainment. That commitment is what keeps the film alive decades later. When Tyrone Turner looks back, he says the film feels like an echo of everything America tried not to hear. Lorenz Tate calls it a time capsule of pain, still relevant, because the conditions that birthed it remain. Jada Pinkett says its endurance lies in empathy, that amid chaos, someone still tried to save someone. The cinematography feels timeless now, grainy but lyrical. Each frame hums with moral vibration. The dialogue still cuts, but it is the silences that carry weight. The look between Kane and O-Dog before the final act says more about friendship and fate than any speech ever could. What most fans never figured out is that Menace II society is less about death and more about inheritance.
That nigga Kane out there trying to play Mac Daddy in the parking lot. Nigga, hell yeah, that's that nigga.
It shows how trauma passes hands, how conscience becomes currency, and how redemption hides in impossible places. The film endures because truth does. And because the cast dared to treat performance as confession, they gave the world something rare, a mirror that still reflects honestly. But before the credits roll on this story, there is one more secret worth hearing: the human cost behind the glow. For all its acclaim, the making of Menace II. Society left emotional scars. Tyrone Turner battled depression in the years after release. He said that slipping back into normal life after embodying Kane felt impossible. He spent months avoiding interviews because people treated him like the character, not the actor. Lorenz Tate felt the same displacement. Fame came fast, but comfort did not. He admitted that the applause sometimes felt hollow because it was built on misunderstanding. He said that people wanted O-Dog's fearlessness, but not his fragility. Jada Pinkett spoke of carrying the film's moral weight into her later activism. She believed that if the story exposed wounds, then artists had a duty to help heal them. Her later advocacy for youth programs grew directly from what she saw and felt on that set. Even the Hughes brothers confessed that finishing the film felt like surviving a storm. They were proud but drained. Albert Hughes once said he would never again direct something that real because the truth can wound as deeply as fiction heals.
Yo, man, what's up? Man, get your bitch ass up and answer the door.
That cost, however, is what makes the legacy sacred. None of them chased spectacle. They chased honesty. They built art that bled. And sometimes that is the highest kind of achievement. Now, as the cast continues to reflect on their journey, one theme keeps resurfacing: redemption not in story but in survival. 3 decades later, Menace II Society stands unshaken. It is no longer just a film, but a chronicle of courage captured in 24 frames per second. The cast who once feared its shadow now embrace it as testimony. They revealed that what most fans never figured out was the depth of humanity hidden beneath the violence. So watch it again with fresh eyes. Listen to the silences. Look beyond the gunfire. Every frame is a confession, every performance a heartbeat. And maybe ask yourself the question the cast still wrestles with. When the story feels this real, does it ever truly end? If this story moved you, leave a like and keep the conversation alive. Somewhere out there, Kane's echo still walks the streets, and maybe understanding him is how we finally understand ourselves.